Loading, loading. Any second. There, okay, we got at least YouTube basically there. Now we just need to double check. Is it actually looking right? Yes, it is. Then we are in good shape. All right, let's get the other tab back open because it's much easier to read from. Excuse me, clear out my throat. It's a lot stronger than it was last Shabbat, but my voice is still a little cracky. So I apologize if it makes it hard to understand, but I think the main theme of today will be pretty straightforward. So I don't think it'll be too difficult to get the gist of it. And as always, the texts themselves are available on Sefaria. We will be looking at Rashi and Ramban, also known as Nachmanides, as our paired commentators for today. Okay, well, we've definitely given our normal login buffer, so let's go ahead and get to work. We are in Parashat Shelach, or Shelach Lecha, and this is the Torah portion most famous for the spies, which is what we're going to be reading today. The Torah portion is moving on our narrative, excuse me, moving on our narrative, Bamidbar, that the Israelites are there in the wilderness of Sinai, and they are preparing now to head out. We have done all of the preparations before. We have talked about the census, the organization of the tribes into their formations. We have talked about who will be carrying which pieces of the Mishkan. It's all been done, packed, ready to go. And chapter 13, they are on the march. And on the march means they are coming up to the border of Israel, or Canaan, as it was called at the time. Now, that may be a little surprising because some people continue to use the idiom in English that the Israelites wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. It was not wandering. This was not an aimless walk through the desert. In fact, between Canaan and Egypt at the time was about a week's journey. So there's no reason why it took 40 years, except for the fact that God made sure that it would take 40 years by telling them, don't go. But at this point in the narrative, they are being told, head out. So we are not at the 40-year delay yet. We've had a couple years, so to speak, for the preparation, the building of the Mishkan, the giving of the Torah, and all of that. But now we are heading straight there. And if everything goes according to plan, they will be in the land of Israel very shortly and settling it and all that other good stuff that we see eventually in the book of Joshua. We know, because we've read this book many, many times, that that's not the way it's going to work out. However, some people forget the reason it doesn't work out is because of the episode of the spies. Now, as is usual, when we go into our in-depth studies, we don't usually get a chance to read the entire parasha. At least not yet. I'm not expecting that to change, which means I will give you the spoiler. Hopefully you've read this before, but if you haven't, fair warning, the Israelites don't get into the land of Israel at this point because the spies come back and primarily give a negative report, and that negative report is then picked up by the population at large, and they refuse to head up to the land of Israel. God then lays down a decree that because they refuse to go, that they will never go, meaning those that were of the age and older, as we talked about in our formation of the tribal groups, they will be buried here in the desert, passing from old age. And that means it will only be the next generation that is able to go. And that's where we end up with our 40-year timeline. But how did that happen? What did the spies do? Why were they sent in the first place? As much as we focus on the consequences of what's about to happen, we need to also study the build up to it. What was actually leading to all of these points? Excuse me, I just need to switch on a little extra air. That's better. And that's what we're going to see here. So let's go into chapter 13, see what the Torah lays out. how it unfolds, and then we'll look at our commentary to help us navigate this. So, beginning with verse number 1. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, send agents or spies or men. The word literally is anashim, which, as we're going to see, is important for our commentary, to scout the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelite people. Send one participant from each of their ancestral tribes, or one person from each of the ancestral tribes, each one a chieftain among them. So Moses, by Adonai's command, sent them out from the wilderness of Paran, all of them being men of consequence, all of them being the head leaders of the community, leaders of the Israelites. Now, I'm going to skip through the names because they are not very important, except for pointing out in verse 8 that we get somebody that is going to be better known by a different name, from the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, son of Nun. Indeed, this is Yehoshua, Joshua, son of Nun, but he does have a name change during our text, well, not what we're talking today, but during the Torah. And we'll get down here for once we've got all of our folks named. And we'll come back to why we have this whole collection here, but I don't want to go through all the names. Those were the names of the participants whom Moses sent to scout the land. But Moses changed the name of Hosea, son of Nun, to Joshua, as we mentioned. When Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there into the Negev and on into the hill country, and see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are there towns, are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? And take pains to bring back some fruit of the land. Now, it happened to be the season of the first ripe grapes. Before we get into their actual travels, we get our words here of instruction from Moses of what exactly they are supposed to be doing. And they are supposed to be scouting. This is fairly classic scout behavior. Go in, find out what where the enemies are, how strong they are, find out if they have defensive fortifications or if not. But you'll notice that there is also a parallel mission that does not appear to be very military oriented, and that is scouting out the land itself, whether it is good or whether it is bad. What kind of quality of soil do they have? Are there lots of trees? And of course, to bring back this sampling of fruit. So that is a parallel activity in addition to the more common military scouting. Now, there is a perhaps military explanation for that knowing about the quality of the soil and knowing about the quality of the land and knowing about trees and the fruit will allow them to better prepare for the coming invasion, because the people would live off the land for the ancient world whenever they were conquering a place. And they would need to know, what is there that we'll be able to support ourselves with? How are we going to feed ourselves while we are engaged in the conquest? What is the land like? How many people can it support capably, and those things. So in the ancient world, especially when foraging from the land was the way you fed most of your armies, these would still be very militaristic questions. However, as we'll see, that there are also reasons to think of these as being with a different motivation. All right, let's get through this. Let's get to the scouting. They went up and scouted the land. From the wilderness of Zin at Rehov to Lavot Hamat, they went up into the Negev and came to Hebron, where lived Ahinam, Shashai, Talmai, and the Anakites. Now, Hebron was founded 7 years before Zoan of Egypt. So we're getting a special emphasis here on Hebron, and that makes a lot of sense. Because one, we know that Hebron was special during the time of Abraham and his descendants. And we also know that geographically, if you were coming up from the Sinai Peninsula and coming into the land of Israel proper, not necessarily the map as we currently see it, because the borders of Israel are different than the modern state of Israel, but the area where people would have been living you would have come to Hebron as one of your first major cities. So it makes a great deal of sense that this is mentioned prominently. Onward in verse 23, they reached the Wadi Eshkol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame between two of them, and some pomegranates and figs. The flat place was named Wadi Eshkol because of the cluster that the Israelites cut down there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from scouting the land. So this symbol of two of the scouts carrying a frame with a massive bundle of grapes between them is very symbolic of Israel. Indeed, it is still part of the symbol of the modern state of Israel as well. And of course represents the massive fertility and abundance of the land. And they've gone up for 40 days, and now they come back. And of course, we hear again 40 days as being one of the archetypical numbers in the biblical narratives of a really good, lengthy, thorough time. And we're just going to get the beginning of the fallout. They went straight to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran, and they made their report to them and to the whole community as they showed them the fruit of the land. So they're back. They're making a report. They're making a report to the entire community as well as to Moses and Aaron, and they are showing off what they have brought back. And this is what they told them. We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. So far, so good. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful. And the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there. So this phrase Anakite is left untranslated, but the word Anak in biblical Hebrew can mean a literal giant, somebody that is supernaturally large compared to the average person. Amalekites dwell in the Negev regions. Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country, and Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. So they are giving the division of the land as it is occupied by different tribal or other national affiliations, and explaining that there are all these different people, and some of them quite powerful, living in different places. The Amalekites, of course, the Israelites had already met once, well, twice technically. They had first been attacked, and then they went out and fought back against them and were victorious. And they knew that that was not an easy fight. It needed God's assistance, to say the least. Caleb hushed the people before Moses and said, "Let us by all means go up, and we shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it." But the other men who had gone up with him said, "We cannot attack that people, for it is stronger than we." All right, so we're going to just leave a little bit of a pause there. Actually, you know what? I tell a lie. Let's get one more verse in, because it's this. There's going to be a lot of discussion in the commentary of what comes later, and let's go ahead and we'll just wrap it up and leave. We won't get to 14, but let's finish 13. So thus they spread calumnies among the Israelites about the land they had scouted, saying, "The country that we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers. All the people that we saw in it are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The Anakites are part of the Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them." So they continue reporting this idea that they were there among these mighty people, the Anakites, the giants, and we seemed like grasshoppers in comparison to them, and they must have thought that we looked rather weak and pathetic as well. All right, so that's the end of their report. And as you can guess, the people are going to take it very badly. They're going to refuse to go, and that's going to kick off our very long delay in the desert. Okay, before we jump into our commentary, do we have any questions either on Zoom or on YouTube? Okay, not seeing anybody jumping to it, so let's go ahead and continue. Let's take a look at Rashi as our classic approach, and see what he has to say about this whole thing. And, well, let him speak for himself. Why is this section dealing with the spies put in juxtaposition with the dealing with Miriam's punishment? So, Smichut Parshiyot is something we've bumped across before. When you have two different Torah portions or sections of the Torah that are adjacent, that don't seem to have any obvious thematical link. Oftentimes the Midrash, and the Midrash Rashi will bring, will discuss that there is another layer that ties them together. And here we go. To show the grievousness of the spy's sin, because she, Miriam, was punished on account of the slander which she uttered against her brother, and these sinners witnessed it, and yet they did not take a lesson from her. Okay, so we saw at the very end of chapter 12, Miriam slandering her brother Moses, and the very bad consequences for her during that. And this is a classic sort of Kal v'chomer style argument of saying, look, Miriam was punished and she only insulted her brother. She was only slandering her brother. That's just one person. Now, it was very severe, her punishment, and all of these people would have known about what happened and about what she did that was wrong and how she was punished for it. And yet here we have them coming back and slandering not just Moses, but really slandering the entire nation of Israel. Because by saying we look like grasshoppers, we'll never be able to do it, it is slandering all of them about their weakness. And to make it even worse, there is also an implied slandering of God. For after all, it is God that would be our support, and it was God that was able to take us out of Egypt, and it was God that has defended us and supported us through the wilderness until this point. So saying we can't win is also akin to saying God can't win. And so their slander is larger because their targets are larger, but the slander is also worse because they had a clear example just recently of what goes wrong when you slander. Okay. And let's get down to our main theme. Shelach lecha, send or send for yourself. Okay, what does this mean? It means according to your own judgment. So Rashi is trying to help us. Oops, and sorry, I forgot to roll us back on our Torah text on the left-hand column. Rashi is paying close attention here to this seemingly extraneous word, shelach lecha, right? It could have just said shlach anashim. It could have said sent men or send men. Standard imperative command style grammar. The lecha is unusual. Indeed, if you're thinking that sounds a lot like lech lecha, well, yes, it is also an unusual grammatical structure there, and one that also invites commentary. Well, here we're going to get a very similar commentary to what we saw from lech lecha, but not quite as positive in its implication. So what is this lecha, this for you, doing? Well, it means, according to Rashi, I do not command you, but if you wish to do so, send them. That God is basically saying that, or rather Rashi is saying that God did not order us to send the people in to spy out the land, but instead the people chose for themselves, lecha is the interpretation, to send these spies. Now, you're probably scratching your head and saying, wait a minute. Adonai spoke to Moses saying, send lecha these men. That sounds like God is commanding it. How can we interpret this as being it was the people's idea? Well, that is how we have to continue our discussion. God said this because the Israelites came to Moses and said, we will send men before us, as it is said in Deuteronomy 122, and you approached me, meaning the people approached Moses, all of you saying, we will send men. And Moses took counsel with the Shekhinah, meaning with God, whereupon God said to them, I have told them long ago that the land is good, as it is said, Exodus 3:17, I will bring you up out of affliction of Egypt into a land flowing with milk and honey. By their lives, meaning God is making a promise here, I swear that I will give them now an opportunity to fall into error through the statements of the spies, so that they should not come into possession of it, meaning the land of Israel. All right, so what Rashi is doing is bringing the Midrash here from the Talmud and from other sources that is reconciling what appears to be a contradiction. Here in chapter 13, we see that God is the one initiating the idea of sending spies. But there in chapter 1 of Deuteronomy, we have it reported that the people came to Moses asking that spies be sent to reconnoiter the land. And Rashi is pointing out that we need to use both pieces to try and find a narrative that accounts for each element. And the narrative that the Talmud brings, that Rashi is now reiterating, is that the people came to Moses and said, we want to send spies. And Moses said, let me check with God. And God said, you know what? Fine, send spies. And that is said in a notion of antagonism, that God is upset, that God is pointing out the underlying lack of faith that this gesture seems to imply. That if they truly believe God, the God that brought them out of Egypt, was going to give them a good land, then what do they need to go check? Right? If someone says, hey, I am your absolutely most loyal, trustworthy, best friend person ever, that I have never let you down, and everything I say is good and comes true, and you know that I only have your best interests at heart, and I will buy a car for you, just give me the money. Well, if you truly trust me in every way, shape, and form, then yeah, that's no problem. But if you say, tell you what, I want to look at it first, well, you're saying that there's a lack of trust. And that is the solution of the Talmud and Rashi here in his condensed version to reconcile Deuteronomy with Bamidbar, with Numbers. That the people wanted to reconnoiter because they were lacking in a full understanding and appreciation of God and what God was promising and what God would do. And God then says, fine, go, right? It's said very sharply, Shelach lecha, fine, for yourself, based upon your opinion, fine, you go ahead and send people. And then God, as is normal, provides a structure of how that's going to look, which is one person from each tribe, the head people, well respected in each of the tribe. God gives more shape and definition to their vague request to send spies. And then that becomes the nucleus of a test of whether or not the people are going to head out, spy, hear the report, and take it properly. Let's go ahead and continue on Rashi's understanding of that. Ramban has a very different read, as you'll find out. So, verse 13:3, where we have this idea that God is agreeing, where it says al pi Adonai, that this is done with on the voice of God, or on the mouth of God, rather than saying by the command, as might normally be the translation, and indeed is the translation here in the JPS. Rashi argues it should better be rendered with his consent, meaning that he did not prevent Moses from sending the spies. So it's not so much that God ordered it, but that God did not stand in the way of it once they came up with the idea. Now, what do we make of this? All of them were men, right? Kulam anashim sounds a little unusual, right? Well, here we're going to unpack it a little bit. Whenever the term anashim, which is usually translated as men, is used in scripture, it is a term denoting worthiness. These men, though they later sinned, but at the time when they were appointed, they were worthy men. So this idea of anashim, without any additional descriptor, should be read just as being, these were real guys. I mean, in the sense that they had standing, they had clout in the community. These were not people at the bottom of the social hierarchy. This was not sending out the private or the lance corporal to go and do the scouting. These were the higher ups in each of their tribe, which, as you'll understand, is more important when we get to their report. And then verse 16, when we get our name change for Joshua, and Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Yehoshua, by giving him the name Yehoshua, which is a compound of God's name, and Hosea, which means God may save. He, in effect, prayed for him. May God save you from the evil counsel of the spies. So that Moses is basically trying to say, I know this is going to be difficult, not because of the enemies you'll face, but because of the problems that are going to happen with the other spies. And you're going to need a little extra strength, and that's going to come by this name change, bringing in, incorporating part of God's name, or one of God's names, into your name. Now, let's get into the actual business of spying. Go up this way southward. The south, was the worst part of the land of Israel. To this day, I mean, it's hard to call something the worst. I find the south in Israel beautiful, but on the average agricultural scale, it is not the ideal land. It is not the most perfect and verdant of Israel. The north, the coastal plains, even some of the central hill areas are probably better if you are a farmer or if you are a shepherd. So if we are ranking the land, then we would say that, yeah, the south is probably not the nicest part. Why then did they start there? He bid them spy this out first, because such is the way of merchants. They show a prospective purchaser the inferior goods first, and afterwards they show the best. And indeed, this continues to be a salesperson tactic right up till this day, where they'll show you something that isn't great and then reveal something that would be even better. And it's a way of escalating excitement and anticipation, and not finishing on a down note to ruin the emotion, the feeling of the purchase. And of course, the opposite could have happened, meaning that it wasn't that they came in through the south because that was just what was closest. We know eventually the Israelites will pass the south and come back up through the middle across the eastern bank of the Jordan River. So there were alternatives, as always, and this was then a very deliberate choice. Continuing on with the instructions found in 18 and further, and see the land, what it is. We know what countries are, right? Well, there are countries which rear strong people, and there are countries which rear weak people. There are such as produce a large population, and there are such as produce a small population. So if you say you're going into an area that has so many square miles, that doesn't tell you about what kind of people you're likely to encounter there. The land will have different types of inhabitants, different levels of militarism, different levels of population density. All of those things are rather important. And whether they are strong or weak, he gave them a sign. If they live in open cities, they are strong, since they evidently rely on their own strength. But if they live in fortified cities, they are weak. The Midrash here is trying to answer the question of, how would these people know what made a strong or weak person? I mean, yes, they can tell if someone's able to lift, so many bales of hay an hour, what their physical strength is, but that doesn't tell you what the strength of their military is, because these people are slaves, and they've been in a few battles so far, but none of them would necessarily be masters of surveying the military strength of an enemy. And so Moses is giving them an indication. When you get there, look around. If all of their cities look wide open, well, the only reason they're living wide open must be because they don't feel endangered by anyone else. On the other hand, if they are closed up and high walls, well, you build walls like that because you know that without them, there's no way you could stop the enemies that would attack you. So counterintuitive to ourselves, the city may be strong if it has a wall, but it is an indication of a feeling of weakness among the inhabitants. And a city may be more vulnerable without a wall or fortification, but it does display a certain feeling of strength among the people. And then verse 19, as the Targum points out, this is probably talking about in open places, meaning in cities open and exposed, that would be without a wall, and whether it is good through possessing springs and other good and healthy supplies of water. What is the basic understanding of goodness for a land? Well, it's going to be water, and that is very much true all the way up until the 21st century. Even though most of us are getting our water from the municipal water supply, we all know that that has to come from somewhere, and good, available, clean water is essential anywhere in the world, even if we don't think about it perhaps as much as we should. Whether there are trees in it or not, here it is interpreted by Rashi metaphorically. whether there is a righteous man amongst them who will protect them by his merits. The idea being that if there is somebody that is worthy of God's special affection and attention, like Abraham was when first encountered, then even if the people are poorly defended, then it will make the conquest much more difficult, because that person is going to be receiving a different level of providence as a reward for their righteousness. And again, the reference to the grapes, that these are the dates, and the grapes are ripening at its early stage of growth, just trying to give us the agricultural timeline. Okay. We're going to leave it there for Rashi, now that I've got him marked out. Put that there. And we're going to turn back to Ramban, because Ramban is not satisfied. Ramban is going to first bring us Rashi's commentary. So, send lecha, for yourself, men, meaning as you see fit. I do not command you to send them, but if you wish to do so, send them. God said in this because the Israelites came to Moses and said, let us send men before us, in Deuteronomy. And as it is said, and you came, and you came near to me, every one of you. And Moses inquired what to do with the divine presence, whereupon God said, I told them at the time of the Exodus that it's a good land. As it is said, I will bring you up out of affliction of Egypt into a land with milk and honey. By their lives, I will give them an opportunity to fall into error through the incident of the spies, so that they should not come to possess the land. This is Rashi's language, and from the words of Agadah. So Ramban restated Rashi, slightly different translation, but he is using the same text as ours, and he is pointing out that this is not only Rashi's idea, but also from the general Agadah, indeed the Agadic section of the Talmud. So, why do we have such a long comment? If Rashi has said it, if it is from the Agadah, then we're good, right? Well, no. Ramban has a number of objections to this way of reading the text. Now, before we get to them, I just want to make sure that that's clearly understood. There is an emphasis for the last 100+ years to over mythologize the commentary of Rashi. That Rashi is the first and final word on any section of Tanakh, and that other commentaries are not as important. While it is true that Rashi is absolutely critical and of historical importance, really no one can come close to him, our tradition has never said any one commentary deserves all of the attention and all of the respect. That we are allowed to argue with the commentaries of each other and of our sages. Now, you're going to have to argue hard, and that's why Ramban is going to take a lot of time for this, if you're going to argue against this, but you absolutely can. It should also be pointed out that when Rashi will bring words from the Agadah or from other Midrashic sections, he is often bringing one of many interpretations found from those other earlier stratas of the Chachamim, of the sages. And it is perfectly fine to prefer a different one of those. And Rashi is only bringing one or two sometimes on a particular verse because of his own feeling of what is most relevant at that moment, not because he is saying the other interpretations are wrong. So don't over centralize the Rashi's interpretations. They are amazing, important, and an incredibly good place to start, but not where we should finish. We need to examine if there are other explanations that provide insights and truths that would be missed if we were to only use Rashi's. And indeed, that is exactly what Ramban is going to walk us through. So let's get into Ramban's questions, attack. He's not very delicate about this idea. Here, meaning with this idea that it was the people who asked and God said, fine, I'll let you do it. Here one may ask, if this is so, then Moses himself sinned in this matter. As it is said, and the thing pleased me well, meaning Moses agreed and stated happily that the idea would be to send spies. And furthermore, why did he tell the spies to find out about the land, whether it is good or bad, since he had already been told at the beginning that it is a good land and a large one, a large and spacious land? So Moses seems to A, agree with their premise, B, he seems to focus them in on measuring the land, on taking its quality and into account. And if God had already told Moses, I can't believe they want to check out the land. Don't they remember how good it is? Why did Moses tell them then to be doubly focused on checking the land rather than just checking out, the enemies? Moreover, what did the spies do wrong? Since Moses told them, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwell therein, whether they are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. And he said to them to see about the cities that they dwell in, whether in camps or in strongholds. And at the least, they had to give him an answer to the questions that he had commanded them to find out about. So the people come back and they give that response that we saw at the end of chapter 13. And it's accurate. The people are mighty. The people do look formidable. Their produce is amazing, abundant, and obviously incredibly blessed. That was what they were supposed to do. I mean, did Moses say, "Come back, and if the story's good, tell me, but if the story's bad, keep it to yourself"? No, he told them to come back and report. And they report precisely the things that he asked them to report upon. So what was their trespass, right? What was their sin when they told Moses, nevertheless, the people that dwell in the land are fierce and the cities are fortified and very great? Did he then send them on the understanding that they would give him a false report? Right? How can you be mad at them for coming back and giving accurate information when he's the one who told them which information to gather? So Ramban has some very good questions about this particular midrash, about whether or not it really is the best peshat, the best straightforward interpretation for trying to understand. And indeed, this is a peshat that even can work without trying to reconcile between Deuteronomy and Numbers. Just looking at Numbers itself, it is surprising how the people respond and how they are attacked for their negativity, when it seems that all they're really doing is being, justifiably concerned. Okay, let's carry on with Ramban's analysis. And do not think that their trespass consisted only in their report that it is a land that eats up the inhabitants, eats up its inhabitants. For prior telling this to the people, Caleb already quarreled with them. All right, let's make sure that you see the timeline here. The people go up, they do their little survey, they come back, they give the report that everything was fortified and the people are giants, and Caleb hushes them. Right? Wait a minute, guys. He is already arguing with them and saying, what you are saying is bad. So that is before they talk about, in verse 32, the country we traversed is one that eats its settlers. So it's not just that they really, really, really insulted the land with that notion. They were already in trouble and arguing with Caleb before that, which means something in their report was already problematic. But it can't just be, the report, right? Because isn't that what Moses asked for? And likewise, it is written that the people said, our brethren, meaning the spies, have made our heart to melt, saying the people is greater and taller than we. And here it is written, to fall by the sword, our wives and our little ones will be a prey. So the continuation of the lament of what might be going on. And yet, Moses, our teacher himself, said similar things to the children of the generation of the spies, right? So you can't say that telling them the people are great and if we lose, it's going to be terrible is the problem, because Moses has said those things. Indeed, he emphasized to them the power of the people and the strength of their cities and the might of the giants to a much greater extent than what the spies had told their fathers, as it is written. So remember, the next generation, the ones that will enter the land of Israel after the 40 years in the wilderness, Moses has to give them his pep talk before they go across the Jordan River as well. And this is kind of how it sounds. Hear, O Israel, you are to pass over the Jordan this day to go in to dispossess nations greater and mightier than yourself, cities great and fortified up to the heaven, a people great and tall, the sons of the Anakim, whom you know, and from whom you have heard, who can stand before the sons of Anak. All right, that's not great pep talk from the coach. And it's a very similar pep talk to what the spies said. Well, if the spies are in trouble because they said the people look buff, then why isn't Moses in trouble for that? It doesn't seem like the spies said anything different than what Moses himself has said at other times. So Ramban is very astutely pointing out that the actual sin of the spies is harder to decide, it's harder to find. It's not that they chose to go, because it seems like Moses approved of that and even gave them a shopping list of what to look at. It can't be that they just said, boy, those people are really big and tall and strong, because Moses says that exactly, almost exact same thing as well. So what else could it be? Now, if the trespass of the spies and their sin consisted of this, discouraging the people that gave them about the strength of the people in Canaan, why did Moses dismay the heart of their children, meaning the next generation, in the same way that the spies dismayed the heart of their fathers, as we talked about? Moreover, what reason was there for Moses, our teacher, to send this mission? If they would report that the land is good and its inhabitants are weak, well and good. But if they would say that it's bad or that the people are strong, would it enter his mind to take them back to Egypt? So why would Moses go along with this? Ramban is in this whole first paragraph here trying to reconcile Rashi's statement that God was angry that the people wanted to send spies at all, and Moses begrudgingly went along with it because God was setting a trap. It doesn't sound like Moses is begrudgingly going along with it. It sounds like he is willing and eager to have the spy mission. And it sounds like he is invested in the results. And even some of the results sound very much like Moses's own words. So it doesn't seem to really fit the text well. That does not mean that the text that Rashi brings and the idea of the people lacking faith and that being a problem is uninteresting or unimportant. Of course it is. And as a personal reflection for what can we learn from, sometimes when we act without enough faith, it's very, very useful. But in context, it doesn't seem to cover the whole story. Okay, so Ramban is going to try and bring us through the whole story in a way that he believes fits the facts better. But before that, T. But the explanation of this subject is as follows. The Israelites wanted to act in the way that all those who come to wage war in a foreign country do, namely to send out men to become acquainted with the roads and entrances to the cities, so that when they return from their mission, the scouts will go at the head of the army to show them the way, in a similar manner to that which it says, show us, we pray, the entrance to the city. Thus the Israelites wanted the reconnaissance party to advise them which city they should attack first and from which direction it would be easy to capture the land. This is what they said explicitly, and they, meaning the spies, shall bring us back word of the way by which we must go up and the cities unto which we will come. That is to say, the cities into which we shall come first and from which we will enter the whole country. So Ramban is pointing out there's nothing inherently weird about this whole scenario. There's no lack of faith. If you're going off to fight war, you need information just about roads and city placements if you are a foreigner in the area. They don't have a satellite GPS to help them with their maps. Now, this is the correct guidance to give to anyone who plans to conquer a country. And so did Moses himself do, as it is said, and Moses sent to spy out Jazer. And Joshua, the son of Nun, who was one of these spies, also sent 2 spies, very famously, into the town of Jericho. It was for this reason that the people's request to send out spies pleased Moses. For scripture does not allow man to rely on a miracle in any of its affairs. Instead, it commands those who go out to battle to arm themselves, to take all necessary precautions, and to set ambushes if needed, as scripture relates in connection with the battle for the city of Ai, which was commanded by God, and similarly in many places. Okay, so Ramban is pointing out that we have other spies that get sent by Moses and by Joshua. No one complains about those spies. That seems perfectly fine and normal, not a lack of faith, as Rashi was trying to hint. So why would it be a problem here? Indeed, if they were to not send spies and rely 100% on faith, that in itself would be very problematic, because we are told we're not supposed to rely on miracles. That if you go out to fight, you actually pick up a spear and a shield. You don't say, God will defend me. And you actually need to find out where the cities are and where they are weak. That you don't just say, God will take the city for me. So Ramban is pointing out that everything up to this point in his presentation is very reasonable, very appropriate, and that's why Moses seemed absolutely fine with it for an idea. Okay. Then Moses consulted the divine presence. So Moses thinks it's a great idea, but he goes and talks to God. And God gave him permission, saying, send thee men, send for yourself men, that they may spy out the land of Canaan, as we see more in detail here in chapter 13, and become acquainted with it and bring back a report to you. And according to their information, you should take counsel regarding the conquest, as the implication of that. Now Moses told the spies, get up from here and go into the south, meaning go up by this road into the south so that you will get to know the people who live in the land of the south, this being the direction from which Israel was approaching, and see whether they are strong. And the Israelites, when dealing with them, will need to be very much on their guard and well armed. Similarly, see the cities and whether they are fortified so that the inhabitants are well entrenched, and it will therefore be necessary to build forts and ramps, or even to come against them from another direction. All makes perfect sense. God gave approval for this mission. Moses gives them more information that fits a very direct military investigation of the situation. Moses further told them that they should get to know the land itself, whether it is good or bad. And if it is bad, they should first conquer other parts of it. For they spied out the hill country of the Amorites on the side of Hebron. And even Joshua did not conquer all the areas of the land, this being the meaning of the expression, and what the land is that they dwell in, meaning the people who live in the land of the south. So there is a misconception that the land was going to be conquered like like pouring paint across the map, and it would just hit where the Israelites first hit and spill across the land, and everything would be covered in that beautiful animation of an army marching across, the little arrows filling in the map, all blue, let's say, for the color of Israel. That was never the intention, and that was never the execution. Indeed, we know from other places that God says he's not going to drive out all the inhabitants, because then the land would become feral. That we know from the book of Joshua that the land is conquered piecemeal, and it is not conquered in a one contiguous group, that certain areas are conquered earlier, others are bypassed, they're come back to later, that the conquering of the land is not just sweeping across a map with your color. So it makes some sense. Where should we start? Well, you're going to want to start where the land is good, right? Because you're going to be living off the land and you're going to need to grow from that land. So don't start with the unproductive part of the country. Start with the productive. It'll help you and it'll take away productivity from your enemy. Very sensible, straightforward, standard military thinking. Furthermore, it is possible that it was because Moses knew that it is a fertile and good land, as he was told, unto a good land and a large one, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, that he told them to set their minds ascertaining this fact, so that upon their return they would tell the people about it, and they would rejoice and gain renewed strength to go up there in joy. Therefore he told them, and be of good courage and bring the fruit of the land, so that the people would see with their own eyes the goodness of the land. So Moses wanted to make sure that the people would be excited about the fruit and the produce of the land, because that was, after all, something that was lacking during their time living off manna, which, as we know, the Israelites are going to complain about. So telling them and showing them that there's wonderful, good things in the land would be giving them that extra strength and excitement. Now, it is well known that Egypt is not very far from Hebron, approximately a 7 days journey distant, and the border of the land of Canaan comes close to Egypt, and it is therefore impossible that the people who live in Egypt should not know about the land of Canaan, whether it is good or bad. So Ramban is pointing out that, yeah, on a map, even in the ancient world, Egypt and Canaan are not far apart. And indeed, Canaan has been part of the Egyptian empire at many different points during the Egyptian dynasties. So if you lived in Egypt, especially on the border of Egypt facing Canaan, which is exactly the area of Egypt where the Israelites were living in Goshen and the environs, of course they would have heard about Canaan. You know, people would have traveled back and forth. They would have brought news. They would have brought information. And they would have heard, you know, all sorts of things about the land that's just a week away. I mean, it'd be the equivalent of, you know, somebody living in France and not knowing anything about Italy. I mean, they may not know everything. They may not know exactly which road leads to Rome. Hint, it's all of them. But they would at least know some of what Italy produces and some of its major distinguishing features. So that should have been assumed. Now, it is well known that Egypt is not very far from Hebron. Indeed, approximately, sorry, I skipped, I already read that part. And indeed, Moses' intention was to find out the way by which he should go up and the cities which he was to capture first, as I have explained. However, since the Israelites in Egypt were slaves doing most rigorous work, they did not know, neither did they understand, the nature of the land. Therefore, Moses wanted the spies to tell them all the particulars of the land in order to cause them to rejoice in its qualities, since he himself knew of them, as explained above. So Moses had a very good understanding of this. The people, less so. They needed more firsthand experience to properly build up their excitement and enthusiasm. Now, it appears to me from the language of the scripture that Moses did not, in fact, consult the divine presence as to whether he should send spies at all. But the meaning of send yourself men, Shelach lecha, is that they, the people, had decided already to send spies, and it was customary to send 2 spies secretly saying, go view the land, like we see from Joshua, and that they be taken only from some tribes of the people. But God, who knows the future, commanded Moses, here, meaning in Numbers, to send 1 man from each of the tribes of Israel, every one a prince among them. This is because God wanted all the great men to be represented equally in this matter, so that perhaps they would remember and turn to the Eternal One. And if not, so that the decree of punishment would apply equally to the whole people, this being the meaning of the expression that Moses sent to them according to the command of the Eternal. For it was by command of God that they were to be princes and heads of the children of Israel. So dealing with, well, what was the Shelach lecha? What is that strange phrase, if not God, having been consulted, then says, fine, do it, as Rashi implies? Well, what could it mean instead? It could mean that Moses says, great idea, and God goes, yeah, it is okay, fine, but let me just tell you, send them like this. Rather than just the normal couple guys to go across and sneak around, let's send 1 from each tribe, and let's make them like, you know, somebody of good standing in that tribe, not just, you know, random guy chosen from the army. So Ramban is implying that this Shelach lecha command from God is indeed a command, but it's not the command to send spies. That was the people's idea, and a very fine one and in its base, but it was God's command of how to send the spies, how to pick them, and what they had to have as their qualities. And I'm noticing our time is running out, but I think we're going to be okay. It further appears to me, according to the plain meaning of Scripture, that God, in speaking to Moses, did not refer at all to the request which the people had made to send out spies, nor to Moses' consent to that request, for if that were the case, Scripture here would have related. And the children of Israel approached Moses and said, let us send men before us, and the thing pleased Moses as well. And afterwards it would have written, and the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, send for Shelach lecha, send for yourself men, as they have spoken to you, 1 man, blah, blah, blah. But the matter was as follows. So it would have been written differently if that was the full narrative. Instead, here is what Ramban thinks actually happened. The Israelites asked to send spies, and the thing pleased Moses. And afterwards, a divine communication came to Moses, as did all other such communications, merely saying, Shelach lecha, send for yourself men. This being the reason for the necessity of the subsequent explanatory words, that they may spy out the land of Canaan, which I give to the children of Israel. As he is speaking of a new matter about which nothing has been related. All this was because the Eternal was pleased, for his righteousness' sake, that the mission be at his command, and that it be with the participation of all of their tribes and their great men, so that the people should be saved. So rather than looking at the whole spy matter as being the people stumbling and God preparing a trap for them, as Rashi implies from the reading of the Talmud, instead Ramban says, actually, no, the people were going to go spy, which was perfectly fine, and Moses agreed, but God saw the potential for the problem here and decided to try and stack the deck as best as possible to avoid what was coming, to avoid the calamity of their loss of faith and their unwillingness to then enter the land when God tells them to, which is the actual sin for which they are truly culpable. They weren't wrong for pointing out the land's amazing residents that were so strong. That was what the spying was for. But it was refusing to go up to fight where they really had the proper problem. So here, Ramban is putting it in a very straightforward way. Now, we don't need to go through all of the rest of it, which is a little bit more of the grammar explanation and showing how things work in a way that is just trying to show the parallels for many other versions. But I do want to come down here for, in the opinion of our rabbis, their sin was in saying, let us send men before us, because they had seen the salvation of the Eternal, which continually did for them, and that they should have followed the cloud wherever the Spirit was to go. And Moses accepted their request to fulfill their desire. The meaning then of the verse, and the thing pleased me as well, is I endured your evil plan and directed that it be done. So this is how, yes, indeed, there is that idea of within the sages, as Rashi brought, but it is, in my opinion, less satisfying. And I think that for Ramban as well, it is more satisfying to say this was a perfectly fine plan. It was going for the right reasons, and God gave them the best opportunity to succeed. But when they came back, they gave an accurate report, but they understood it wrong, meaning that they did everything right as far as the mission was concerned. They went where they were supposed to, they learned what they were supposed to, and they told what they were supposed to. None of that was a sin. But they decided from what they had revealed that it was going to be impossible to be able to conquer the land. That is where they stumble. That it is perfectly normal and indeed laudatory, as Ramban made clear, to take adequate preparations to defend yourself for battle and to prepare yourself for any conflict. But if you believe that the conflict will only be won by the side that has the most giants, and you know that God has already commanded you to do this, in this case, to settle the land, then you are misunderstanding the power of God versus the power of giants. And that's really where the people fell apart. And it's where we also have to always continue to work on our own internal strength, our own internal emunah, our faith. Faith doesn't mean burying head in the sand. It doesn't mean ignoring facts in front of us. It doesn't mean that we don't bother trying because God has a plan. We know what God has asked us to do for the range of human activity, whether it be taking care of the sick, taking care of the poor, whether it be protecting as good stewards the world around us, or any of the other thousands and thousands of things that are before us as tasks to be done individually and collectively. we have to apply effort for all of those, and we have to do so by gathering good information and by analyzing it correctly and, doing the math. But we also have to make sure that we don't say it looks really, really hard and let's not do it then. When we say it looks really, really hard, we say, yeah, but God asked us to do it, so it can't be impossible. Let's figure out how we make it work despite all of the facts arrayed against us, rather than throwing up our hands and giving up before even trying. If we're able to learn that lesson from this debacle of the spies, then I think that we will be in a much better place. Are there any final questions from anyone, either on Zoom or on YouTube? Not seeing anyone raising hands, and we've gone slightly over, for which I apologize. I try to be mindful of your time, but hopefully you'll not begrudge me too much. All right, everyone, take care, continue to study. A reminder, there will be no class next week because I will be on vacation. And that's the 21st, the 28th, the 5th, and the 12th. There will be no class. So our next class together for Torah study will be on the 19th of July. Take care.